All right, let's jump into a new deep dive today. This time, it's all about building a successful marriage. Sound familiar?
Definitely a topic that's always top of mind for a lot of folks, I'd imagine.
For sure. So, we got sent this podcast episode titled Building a Successful Marriage: The Two Essential Keys You Need to Know. Catchy, right?
Two essential keys. I'm intrigued.
Me too. It's from a podcast called The Sunshine Inside. And right away, they come out strong, saying these keys come straight from the Bible. I know you're all about the practical advice, so what's your take on that? Are they going to give us real world stuff, or is it all just feel good stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, framing it around biblical wisdom definitely speaks to a certain audience. But hey, maybe the core ideas can apply to anyone who wants a strong relationship, right?
Okay, I like that. So they don't waste any time getting to the first key, knowledge. They even quote Hosea 4.6, which says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge."
Hmm.
Their point is you got to understand how marriage works, not just, a wish for a good one.
Makes sense.
They compare it to having all these detailed maps but no sense of direction, which honestly I can relate to.
Uh-huh.
But when they say knowledge, what kind are we talking about? Is it knowing, like, your partner's favorite food and what movies they like? Or is it something more?
I think they're aiming for something deeper than that, like almost like emotional intelligence.
Oh,
Knowing how you communicate,
yeah.
your different attachment styles, even like figuring out how to work through disagreements without it turning into a huge fight.
So you're saying this kind of knowledge is something you can actually learn then?
Oh, absolutely. You can definitely build those skills.
So it's like you have the roadmap, but you got to know how to read it too.
Exactly. It's not enough to just have the information. You got to know how to use it.
And that probably goes way beyond just reading a relationship self-help book, huh?
For sure. This kind of knowledge comes from really seeing your partner, understanding their reactions,
Yeah.
figuring out their love language, all that.
So it's about moving past those initial, like, romantic gestures and getting to something deeper.
Yeah, it's about building that genuine connection where there's mutual understanding and respect.
Got it. And this leads us to their second key: sacrificial love. This is where it gets even more interesting, I think.
Oh, definitely.
They're saying it's got to go beyond that initial romantic spark.
It's about tapping into something more selfless.
They bring in Philippians 2.3 here, where it says to value others above yourselves.
Powerful stuff.
Right. And then the podcast host talks about, like, letting go of always needing to be right, especially during arguments, which, let's be honest, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
So are they saying that this kind of putting your partner first is like the secret to a happy marriage?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Right. Because, like, sacrificing for your partner sounds great and all, but could you go too far? Like, lose yourself in the process.
That's the thing. Sacrifice is important, but it's got to be balanced. You know?
Okay, so how do you find that balance? When do you sacrifice and when do you stand your ground?
That's where the first key, that knowledge, comes back in. Because really understanding yourself, your limits, that's part of it too.
So it's like knowing when to compromise and when to, like, advocate for what you need.
Exactly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and the relationship is to take care of your own well-being.
That's a good point. It's not about being a pushover, it's about being smart about it. Now, the podcast also talks about aligning your attitude with God's and about using positive language in your marriage. They even quote Isaiah 55.8-9,
Okay.
where it says that God's ways and thoughts are higher than ours.
Right.
So they're saying we need to try and see things from a, like, higher perspective.
I see where they're going with that.
Yeah, and they use this story from Judges 6.1 about Gideon as an example. Gideon's full of self-doubt, but he's still called a mighty warrior, right?
I'm familiar with that story.
So the point is, the words we use have power. Do you think just speaking positively, like speaking life into your marriage, can actually change things?
You know, there's actually a lot of research in psychology that says yes. Words really can affect how we see things, our emotions, even our brain over time.
So, like, you're literally rewiring your brain for the better.
Kind of, yeah. And this goes for how we talk to ourselves,
Yeah.
how we talk to our partners.
Wow, okay. So it's more than just, like, avoiding saying mean things. It's about intentionally being encouraging and positive.
Yeah,
Makes you think about the language you use in your own relationships, huh?
it really does.
Now, they wrap up with this really interesting point. They quote Matthew 16.25, which says, "Whoever loses his life for my sake will find it."
Okay.
And they're basically saying that this idea of losing yourself is actually the key to being truly fulfilled in marriage.
That's a tricky one. It's like we're told marriage is about two becoming one, but we also want to keep our individuality.
Exactly. And the podcast seems to think you can do both.
Perhaps losing yourself doesn't mean erasing who you are, but more like letting go of your ego,
Hmm.
like not needing to control everything, being open to where things go.
So it's more about trusting the process, trusting your partner.
I think so. It's about embracing that uncertainty that comes with building a life together, knowing there'll be ups and downs.
And that takes us back to the first key, right? Knowledge, understanding yourself, what you need.
You got it. Recognizing that both you and your partner are always changing, always growing.
Marriage is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly.
And that second key, sacrificial love, that plays a big part in the journey, right?
It sure does.
Yeah.
Knowing when your partner's needs have to come first and when yours do. Finding that balance.
Which takes communication, empathy, being able to see things from your partner's point of view.
All of that.
It's about loving them even when they're not so easy to love, you know?
We all have those moments, right?
For sure. And that's where what the podcast calls the language of life is so important. Choosing to use encouraging words even when you're frustrated.
Yeah, it's about shifting your focus from what's wrong with you to how can I help?
Those little acts of kindness, those positive words, they can add up over time.
They really can.
Mm.
They build that foundation of respect and trust.
And that's something we can all work towards no matter what our beliefs are, right?
Absolutely. It's about being mindful of how our words affect others and using them to build each other up.
Because in the end, we're all in this together trying to figure out how to connect with each other, find love and belonging.
That's the truth. And maybe, just maybe, these essential keys can help us find a little more happiness along the way.
Well said. So we've dug pretty deep into this podcast about building a successful marriage, explored those two essential keys they talked about, knowledge and sacrificial love, and really looked at what they mean in practice.
We've gone beyond just summarizing and really tried to connect these ideas with research and psychology.
And that's what makes this so valuable for our listeners, right? They're getting a much broader perspective.
For sure.
So if we were to boil all of this down to some key takeaways, what would you say they are? For the people listening right now.
Well, first off, knowledge is essential in any marriage. But like we've been saying, it's not just knowing basic facts about your partner. It's about developing that deeper emotional understanding.
Understanding how you communicate, how to handle disagreements.
Recognizing that you and your partner are two different individuals with different experiences and perspectives.
And being willing to keep learning and growing throughout your relationship.
Exactly.
The second key, sacrificial love, that's equally important but often misunderstood.
It's not about being a doormat or always putting your own needs last.
It's about choosing to love your partner, even when it's hard.
Knowing that sometimes their needs will come before yours.
But also understanding that true sacrifice comes from a place of love, not resentment.
Because if you're constantly giving till you're empty, you won't have anything left for the relationship.
Which brings us back to that self-awareness piece.
Knowing your limits, setting boundaries.
Finding that balance between caring for your partner and caring for yourself.
Right.
Now, the podcast also talked about the power of words.
Speaking life into your marriage.
That stuck with me too. Words really do have so much power, you know?
Absolutely.
And the way we talk to our partners can either lift them up or tear them down.
It's about being mindful of our tone, our word choices, and how they affect the person we love.
And making a conscious effort to use language that strengthens your bond.
So, what have we learned from all this? It seems like these essential keys are more like guidelines, not strict rules.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's not about reaching some perfect state of marriage. It's about the journey together.
Exactly. Embracing the ups and downs that come with building a life with another human being.
And knowing that there's no one right way to do it.
What works for one couple might not work for another.
It's about finding what works for you, communicating your needs, and being willing to adapt along the way.
And above all, it's about choosing to love each other every single day.
Even when it's tough.
Because that's the foundation of any strong relationship.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of marriage, guided by this podcast and your awesome insights.
We've covered biblical principles, psychology, practical tips, something for everyone, no matter your background or beliefs.
Hopefully you found it helpful, maybe even a little thought-provoking.
Remember, a successful marriage isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, learning, and growing together.
And if you're ever feeling lost, you know where to find us. Send us your questions, your curiosities, and we'll be here to dive deep with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going.
And remember, the most important journey is the one we take together.
And that's a wrap on the deep dive.
It's kind of amazing how much we've already talked about. This podcast really does a good job of mixing practical advice with, like, deeper questions about connecting with someone.
Right. And you've been awesome at explaining those ideas and bringing in research and stuff, which I know our listeners appreciate because they want to know the why behind the what,
Absolutely. And one of the most interesting things they talk about is that idea of losing yourself in marriage is something a lot of people worry about, right? How to be yourself, but also be part of a couple.
Yeah, especially nowadays when everyone's all about self-discovery and all that. So how do you balance that with being committed to someone else, making sacrifices and stuff?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And this podcast, coming from a religious perspective, they seem to think you can do both.
So what does that actually look like in real life? Is it about finding things you both like, or is there more to it?
I think it's more about recognizing that losing yourself doesn't have to mean you disappear as a person. It's more about letting go of that need to always be right, to control everything. It's about seeing the us, but not forgetting the me.
So it's not about changing who you are for your partner, but more about growing together.
Exactly. And that takes a lot of trust, being vulnerable and being okay with not knowing exactly how things will turn out. It's about embracing the adventure of building a life together, knowing there'll be some bumps along the way.
Which brings us back to that first key we talked about, knowledge. It's not just about knowing your partner, but knowing yourself too, right? Your needs, what you want.
You nailed it. You got to remember that both you and your partner are works in progress, always changing.
Marriage is a journey, not a destination.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that second key, sacrificial love, that's a big part of that journey, right?
Oh, for sure. It's realizing that sometimes your partner's needs come first, sometimes yours do. It's about finding that balance, that give and take that makes a relationship work.
Which takes communication, being able to see things from your partner's side, even when it's hard.
Yep, all of that.
It's about loving them, even when they're being, well, not so lovable.
Yeah, we've all been there, haven't we?
Definitely. And that's where I think that language of life the podcast talked about is so important. Making a choice to say encouraging things, even when you're annoyed.
It's like changing your thinking from what's wrong with you to how can I help you?
Those little things, those kind words, they make a difference over time.
They really do. It's about building that foundation of respect and trust.
And that's something we can all try to do in any relationship, not just romantic ones.
Exactly. We all have the power to choose our words to build each other up or tear each other down.
And when we build each other up, it makes everything better, doesn't it?
For sure.
So it seems like these essential keys they're talking about, they're more like guidelines, not rules.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. It's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the messiness of real life, of building a life together.
And recognizing that there's no one right way to do it.
Different things work for different couples.
It's about finding what works for you, talking to each other, and being willing to change as you go.
And at the end of the day, it's about choosing love, even when it's hard.
Because that's what makes a relationship strong.
Couldn't agree more.
Wow, we covered a lot in this deep dive into marriage, explored those two essential keys from the podcast, knowledge and sacrificial love. And we really got into what they mean, like, practically speaking.
Yeah, we went beyond just repeating what the podcast said. Tried to tie it all in with research and psychology, give you guys a bigger picture.
Which is what our listeners are here for, right? They want more than just a summary.
Exactly.
So if you had to sum up what we talked about, like the main takeaways, what would you say for the people listening in?
Well, first of all, it's clear that knowledge is super important in a marriage. But like we said, it's not just about knowing your partner's favorite color or whatever. It's about that deeper understanding.
Understanding how to communicate, how to handle disagreements.
Yeah. And recognizing that you and your partner, you're two different people with different backgrounds, different ways of seeing things.
And being open to learning more about each other as you go through life together.
Exactly.
That second key, sacrificial love, that's a big one too, but people get confused about it.
It's not about being a pushover, always putting your needs last.
It's about choosing to love your partner, even when it's tough.
Knowing that sometimes they need you more.
But also knowing that real sacrifice, it comes from love, not from feeling obligated.
Because if you're always giving till you're empty, the relationship suffers.
Right. which takes us back to that self-awareness thing.
Setting boundaries, knowing your limits.
Finding that balance between taking care of your partner and taking care of yourself.
That's it.
They also talked about the power of words, speaking life into your marriage.
That really resonated with me.
Me too.
Yeah.
Our words have so much power, it's crazy.
They really do.
And the way we talk to our partners, it can either make them feel amazing or absolutely terrible.
It's about being mindful,
Mm.
thinking about your tone, what you're saying, and how it affects the person you love.
And making that effort to use words that bring you closer, that strengthen your bond.
So what's a big takeaway from all of this? It seems like those essential keys are more like guiding principles, not a strict set of rules to follow.
I think that's a great way to look at it. It's not about being the perfect couple. It's about the journey together through good times and bad.
Exactly. Embracing the messiness of it all, the ups and downs of building a life with another person.
And there's no one right way to do it, right?
Yep. What works for one couple might not work for another.
It's about finding what works for you as a couple, being honest about what you need, and being willing to change as you go.
And at the end of the day, it's about choosing to love each other every day,
Even when it's hard.
because that's what keeps a relationship strong.
So, there you have it. Our deep dive into the world of marriage, using this podcast as our guide, along with your amazing insights.
We talked about what the Bible says, psychology, practical tips, something for everyone, no matter where you're coming from.
Hope you guys found it helpful, maybe even got you thinking a bit.
Remember, having a successful marriage isn't about knowing all the answers. It's about asking the right questions, learning, growing together.
And if you ever feel lost, you know what to do. Send us your questions, anything you're curious about, and we'll be here to dive in with you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those conversations going.
Remember, the most important journey is the one we take together.
And that's a wrap on the deep dive.